Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Aaron Cavley, and I'm going to bring you probably a not so short review, not so quick review, as you might have seen. I changed the text on my intro, so since I just can't seem to keep them short. Today I'm going to cover Elemental. It is a universal role-playing system. I got the book just because I like to collect books. It's your typical print-on-demand fare, pretty high quality, gotten from Drive-Thru RPG. We'll go over the PDF so you can actually see what's going on, but pretty vibrant. The colors are pretty good, and it's well made. A lot of stuff in this book. Let's go over it. Now, as a universal system, I've I've always liked universal systems. I like the idea of having one game system to learn that can cover all sorts of different things. But that can be pretty hard to do just because there's so many genres and there's so many ways to stretch a rule set. And I think Elemental does a really good job of it. And we go down here to their intro page, the PDF. You see the links, the sections on the index, table of contents they're all linked within the PDF. And it talks about its design philosophy: one rule, many applications. Like I said, it's hard to do that, but because Elemental has more of a rulings versus rules idea, this kind of free Kriegspiel, uh, where a lot of the mechanics are left to the game master, then it allows that one rule, many applications to work pretty well. A lot of universal systems, especially very streamlined ones, will have, every rule is basically the same. You're just changing the dressing. And Elemental kind of works that same way, but it has a variety of mechanics to cover these things. Not enough. I think it strikes a very good balance between having enough variety in the rules mechanics to avoid everything being samey and not overwhelming you with a bunch of rule breaking exceptions. And that's what I find happens a lot in universal systems, because to cover different genres, they put traits and edges and things in there, and instead of just using the normal skill rolls, then you have these special little things. Elemental does do some of that too, and I'll get into that later when we start talking about the skills. Elemental is a D6 system, and the D6 system in general gives you a fairly limited number of results, a limited range of results that you can get compared to other dice systems, D20, D100, whatever. And it's a D6 plus attribute plus skill level, and then modified by other environmental bonuses or penalties. Fairly standard, fair with the dice versus a target number. With such low numbers, a static target number can be kind of hard to manage, because it either makes it very hard to hit when you're beginning, or very easy to hit after you've gained a couple skill levels, because usually it's a matter with a die 6 level, usually the target number is 6 or 7. But they've used a pretty good way to overcome that, to increase that range, is that it uses a dynamic difficulty system, a dynamic target number. The player rolls die 6, adds attributes and skills, and then the GM determines the difficulty number and then adds that to a die 6 roll. Um, and it would seem that it could get pretty swingy, which I guess it can, but because you're using die 6, that limited number, that limited range actually works to advantage using that system. One of the things that really impressed me as I was reading Elemental is the way that they came up with these very simple yet effective mechanics to mitigate some of these problems you get with a single dice 6 system. Another one is the criticals, and that's a pretty cool mechanic because usually a critical hit is either you're rolling the highest or the lowest for a critical fail. But since every roll is contested, essentially the GM's rolling and modifying by the uh, difficulty level, if both parties roll 6s, then that's a critical. And it's the final total after that because the system uses breaks. It has an exploding dice mechanic, but it only explodes once. And so both sides roll a 6, and now everyone knows that it's a critical, and then the next roll becomes almost that much more tension filled because the stakes have doubled. And it's a pretty neat mechanic. I really like it. And with the exploding d6, that also does take care of other things that you might run into where, say, you have someone with a low probability of hitting, say, someone who's really fast or tough to hit. You can use the brakes, can pop in there to kind of randomize things, even things out sometimes, but it's not going to turn into some kind of big exploded dice chain because it only breaks once. Okay. Now we can see here there's one page of rules. You can break down all the rules into one page. In this game, you can actually order. This is the complete. You can order a free version that has most of the rules. It just doesn't have a bunch of the genre stuff. It doesn't have a lot of the descriptions like for the skills and things. It's designed basically so you can read it and get the basics of it without giving the bank away. But it's right here. It's very simple. It's a point buy system, and it's pretty low points, generally speaking. 20 points is what they recommend. That gives you a just slightly above average character, but there's a range. So if you want to make super people, or even say you want to go all the way down grimdark and you want to make some kind of wimpy, level 0 person who's going to get killed the first time a goblin farts at him, then you can do that too. And here it describes the character creation, combat, and how to use the powers. I also like the death mechanic because it uses health, which I'll get to that in a second, which is basically hit points. And a lot of games these days, 0 just means you're knocked out, and then a bunch of other stuff can save you. But in this case, when you get down to 0 or negative number, you really have a good chance of dying. You're out of the fight if someone doesn't save you, or if they don't save you enough, then you're dead. And if no one saves you after a couple of minutes, then you have to make a roll based on how hard you are in the negative, which I think is also pretty good mechanic. And if you don't make it, you're dead. So that works pretty well. I like a death mechanic like that. I like a game where players can die. Building characters, very simple. Each, if you want to get a level of something, it costs that number of experience points plus every number beneath it. So if you want to get something up to level 3, it's going to cost you 3 points. But you also have to have bought at level at 2, which will be 2 more points. And you'll have to have bought it at level 1, which will be 1 point. So for a total of 6 experience points. In this system, an average person, an average competent person, will have 1 in their stats. Someone with a 2 is a little higher than average, and 1 or 2 skill points. That's an average person. So you can see a character who has 20 points, even though they're not going to be some kind of Superman, they will have a wider range of abilities. And it's been interesting to get back into a point-based system, because everything I've kind of been playing recently, or a lot of what I've been playing recently, is rolled stats, and not a lot of point build going on. Here's a quick explanation of how to build a character. Your attributes are agility. It boils it down to 4. Agility, which is, your quickness, adroitness, balance, all that stuff. And toughness is a measure of, your general strength, how tough you are, your endurance, and pretty much everything about you that isn't quick twitch agility stuff. Your agility is used to determine your move. Your toughness is used to determine your health. Awareness is kind of a rolling up of your intellect, your intuition, your perception, and it determines your initiative derived stat. Each attribute has a derived stat. And will is your, strength of willpower, your personality, courage, stuff like that. And it's used for your spirit. And as you can see here in this chart at the bottom, it talks about what average is. All right, so an average is 1. It's a die 6 system, so it's not quite as granular. And then basic talks about the difficulty, which is what I explained. If it's, the GM decides what the difficulty is, he rolls die 6, you have to beat or tie that. You can tie that as well, which has its own separate effects. Damage is straightforward. Most weapons, if it's a melee weapon, it will add your toughness, modified maybe by +1 or -1, depending on the weapon type. Armor it uses a deduct from damage system, so you roll your damage and subtract armor. What you don't do is you don't subtract toughness from the damage roll, which is good because it avoids that kind of Iron Dwarf syndrome from some of the Warhammer games. And I'm not going to go over all the rules. Another interesting mechanic that they've used for saving rules is any of these derived attributes is equal to 9 plus the number of XP to get it there. So if you have a toughness of 1, its derived attribute, health, is going to be 9 plus 1. If you have a toughness of 2, which is a total of 3 experience points, it's going to be 12. At first, it seems a little, I don't want to say off-putting, but it seems a little odd that it's not like a linear progression. It's got a definitely some kind of increasing function of some sort, because as each level of the attribute goes up, the number of experience points to get there isn't linear. So you get these steps, and it basically is 10, 12, 15, and so on. It goes up. Um, but it works pretty well because, again, since it's such a low range of values, generally speaking, this allows you to turn that into more points that can kind of be manipulated as you're playing. And to make a save against those things, like a move you might be if you're trying to run across some kind of debris-strewn field, you roll die 6 times die 6, which is another pretty good uh, mechanic. At first, and that's kind of the thing with all the elemental mechanics. Well, not all of them, but some of them. At first, I read it, and it's like, well, how does that work? But then I think about it for a second and play with it, and it works pretty well. Because 3 and a 4 are going to be kind of your average numbers when you're rolling die 6 times die 6. 1 through 3, 1 through 4 gives you a pretty good chance, but about 50-50 of being able to pass something that needs a 12. Because you have a number of results that will get you 12 or lower. 1 times 1, 2 times 2, 3 times 3, so on and so forth. So that was another kind of cool mechanic that I liked. Initiative is static. You have the highest initiative, you go first. There are some things that you can do that will modify your initiative. Certain effects can reduce your initiative. If certain skills, like if you try to aim, it will knock your initiative down a couple steps. But pretty simple. I like using a more dynamic system, so I will probably come up with some kind of random modifier on that die 6 plus or something like that. And then you also can, when you're picking your skills, your skills are limited to 1 through 3. Your attributes can go up, really high. So now an average character is not going to have super high stats, but just that's how it works. Here's a discussion of how to make the rolls, how the criticals work. And there's the task is tricky, difficult, or formidable. Those are suggested ranges to make those things. And I like this little GM tip about setting and rolling the difficulty, where it talks about the GM basically feeling more comfortable coming up with reasonable difficulty levels off the fly without necessarily having to consult a chart or a table. I do that a lot. Will it be hard? -2. Will it be easy? +1 or +2, right? And that falls into that rulings, not rules kind of thing. And Elemental, a lot of what it does is it gives you suggestions on how to make the rulings and doesn't give you a big list of rules, which works pretty well. And whenever you're fighting someone, whenever you attack someone in melee, they make you roll. It's basically contesting agility rolls. You roll agility to try to hit them, add your skill level, and then they're trying to make an agility roll to block it or avoid it. Same with ranged. The damage rolls, like I said, the damage rolls will break, but only once. So you can get a good solid hit on somebody, but you're not going to generate some kind of supernova. Here's they have a massive damage rule. That's what happens if it does break. There's a chance that, when it does cause this massive damage, that it may knock you out or stun you or something. and apply what it calls an impairment. And the impairment is a pretty good uh, rule for using the one rule to bind them all in the darkness, or or whatever. One rule, many applications. Um, because it basically just breaks down all your impairments into 3 levels, and you decide what those levels are. It's either slightly impaired, impaired, or severely impaired, and it gives you some examples of what those might be. And so it lets you use this mechanic to cover a wide variety of effects. And so someone can be impaired. You could say it's because they got wounded, like massive damage. It might be that they were wounded, or just that they got knocked over and they have to get back up. They got knocked prone, some kind of tear gas, like it's talking about. And there's penalties and move effects. Severely impaired is you're grappled, you're stunned, you're out, right? And so it just breaks those down into 3 different categories. Um, and so you have, like when it's describing poisons and spells and things like that, if someone gets the effect, it describes them as being one of those levels of being impaired. Here it talks about using the arcane powers. Arcane power is basically anything that you would use for a power that's not it's kind of rare. Spell casting, psionics, or whatever. They have a different section for like superheroes and stuff. Let me take a second to talk about the art in the book. It's pretty good. I like most of it. It's I recognize a lot of the pictures, so I believe Gildor Games probably used some of those purchasable art packs, which I have nothing against. I've purchased 1 or 2 for my own efforts. Um, I don't like CGI people though. I just, that whole uncanny valley thing just really sticks out to me, and I don't like it. But even still, these are all pretty good for CGI people. But look at that. That's a great piece of art. Very invocative. It looks like you've got an Indiana Jones type character. There's a good medic. I think I've got that picture somewhere in a file tucked away for use. That's Brynhild. She shows up in the various supplements. And like I said, I'm not going to go through every situation here, but you can see it covers all the basic things. Here's a list of the skills and flaws, and below the skills are described. Here's a list of what they are and what statistic they're tied to. It would have been good. It would have been convenient, at least for me, to make this list kind of jump to the skill description, but it's not. It's not super. Um, since it's not a super long section, it's easy to skim through. Now, when you look at that skill list. I think there's 65 if I remember my count, which is a lot for games these days. But not all of them are skills in the strictest sense. A lot of them are kind of like Warhammer Fantasy First Edition, where what most games would call traits or edges are rolled up into skills. Which, on the one hand, it can be kind of confusing sometimes, but as far as buying a simple point system, they're bought the same way as skills. It can be level 1, 2, or 3. The skills, most of the skills, are basically you add them to your roll. But a lot of them also have different effects that you can do, like the athletics. It's basically you can add that to your roll for trying to climb or swim or whatever, but you can also use it as an active evasion technique. You add your athletic skill to your defense roll. You can't do anything else because like a full action. It's an active thing you're doing the whole turn. And pretty much the turns are very simple. When it's your turn, you can do one thing. And I like that because it gets hard to keep track of, one major action, three minor actions, a half action, whatever. The round is 6 seconds long, and in the combat that can be a long time. But when you're trying to keep track of minor actions, free actions, and stuff, I really prefer the way it uses just one action. But some of the things like Mighty Blow, it allows you to do extra damage a number of times in combat equal to your Mighty Blow level. And each time you do it, it costs 1 health to kind of represent the muscling through in that sort of thing. But most of them are uh, pretty straightforward when you get used to them. There's a section on the character sheet where you can cut and paste what they are. If there's one, I don't want to say hitch, but if there's one thing that I have reservations about the system, it's using traits. Because I'm not really the biggest fan of traits per se. Systems that use them, they tend to bloat the list every time they put out a new publication. And my poor 50-year-old steel sieve brain has a hard time remembering what they do, and I'm constantly having to look things up. But as a universal system, traits are pretty common just because you need something to expand, to expand the realm of what your characters can do. And overall, there's not a lot in this list that are straight what you might call traits. And they're used in it does a pretty good job of using them to cover multiple genres. Um, One thing that I like is the weapon mastery skill, because you can use that skill level to add to hit roll or to the damage roll or to defense roll if desired. And if you're using like a light offhanded weapon, you can split your skill between damage and defense and stuff. So that it does allow you some tactical decision making. So I like that. That works. That works pretty well. Um, here's the description. Here's some more pretty good art. That I really like kind of the old painting kind of looking art. That was pretty cool. That's a good picture. So the flaw list isn't super long, but it's easy to come up with flaws, and a lot of these flaws are they're designed to be universal. You're out of shape, you're frail, you're weak, you're not lucky, that kind of stuff. For myself, the skill list is also good because it's easily modular. The skill like Second Wind, it allows you to basically heal yourself, and you can do it a bunch if you have the high skills. Some of those things I would limit or remove, and some of the skill like aquatics, it's what it calls swimming. If you have it level 1, that's like a person who knows how to swim. When you start doing level 2 and level 3, those are really levels of being some kind of metahuman or having some kind of cybernetic air tanks or oxygen scrubbers or something like that. Sorry, I know I'm kind of going backwards a little bit. Smart good art. All right, now as a universal system, it doesn't. It gives you a list that covers pretty much everything, the basics, and I like that in the sense that it uses classes. As far as equipment goes, I'm not really a big gearhead guy. I don't necessarily want a list of 23 automatic 9mm pistols, whose only difference is they have one one or two difference in the number of shots, or some kind of arbitrary range differential that really, for the most part, is made up anyway. I like that to be flavor. This is a 9 millimeter. It has a damage of 3, and if you want to add flavor to it, you say, "Oh, this is my Glock 17, and it carries X number of shots." The equipment also doesn't have a price tag, and the explanation they give is one that the prices will be provided in the various source materials, which we'll go over some of those. And the point that I agree with too is that, like I just said, a lot of the price lists are completely arbitrary. Even if you came up with a list of prices for buying, laser rifles on Series Station, it's going to be different if you buy them on Ganymede. Probably a completely different currency. It might be nice to have a base, but it's not really a game that worries too much about um, that level of detail on that. The equipment does have, it is varied enough. It has enough attributes. There are enough attributes, the area effect, the weight, any other kind of notes, things like that. So, and this is the basic equipment level, or the equipment page. Long sword, short sword, great sword. I'm going to give a big strike to Elemental, though, for being katana simps. I'm going to put the katana as some kind of separate super sword or something. That's a negative strike. Sorry, that's just one of my personal pet peeves about katanas in games and fiction. But otherwise, it's a good list. It gives you what you need. There's a pistol flintlock. You can use that to represent any number of pistols from Renaissance era, whatever. So it's a pretty good list. Here is, talks about vehicles, and it gives vehicle stats, which is good. It doesn't really go into designing vehicles, and myself, I'm fine with that because I don't really care to design vehicles myself. Some people really like getting through those. I've got the vehicle design system from Traveler 4E in my shed, and other guides to really make these realistic point-by-point vehicles. But I just don't care to. I usually, if you give me an idea, you give me a World War II bomber like here, then I will make other World War II bombers, something like that. Because the games and the details I use are not necessarily that granular, which is something that I like about Elemental as well, because it has, for me personally, it has the right amount of crunch, what they call crunch, as far as details and rules, without going overboard on things. The armor is a little, I don't know, it's a little lackluster. 2 points of armor doesn't really seem to do much. This is not armor that you can count on to ever stop you from getting damaged in a fight. That's something I'll probably change in my games, because full harness, full plate harness, that can take a lot of damage. You have to know how to fight someone in full plate, in full harness. If you don't, if you just try to whack them with the edge of your sword, you're not going to get very far most of the time. With an armor of 3, generally any person rolling 1d6 with a toughness of 1 and a skill of 1, if they apply that to the damage, you're only not getting hit 1 out of 6 times. The other 5 out of 6 times, their attack is pretty much going unhindered through your plate. So I'll probably add a couple more levels to that. I was pondering, also, and this is kind of an aside, but I was pondering maybe adding that armored combat skill allowing characters to add that armored combat skill to their armor level to represent the fact that they know how to fight in armored combat, that they know how to use the armor to their advantage, use how to deflect blows and things like that. The way the armored combat skill works now is that your level of that skill represents what level of armor you can use. Basically, it breaks down to heavy, light, or medium without suffering an impairment, which is not necessarily a bad way to go. I have some of my games that I like that this reminds me of do that, but I think there needs to be something more than 3 points of armor. If someone in plate armor, someone in Milanese harness, they really should have more than 3. And I don't think it would change the balance either, because here we see flak jackets are armor 4 against bullets, and when we look at the science fiction section real quick, you'll see that there are even higher values, especially since you have break and massive damage. So even if someone does have high level armor, you still have a chance of doing something. Here's the level of experience for making those NPCs. And this is a good section on designing adventures in the background. Pretty standard fare if you've read a lot of RPG books, but pretty good advice. This one's good on how to make encounters and how to make content specifically for Elemental, but it's good rules all the way around. There's another pretty cool picture. Pacing, engagement, all that stuff. Including the section on GM tips on how to run, the rules of the game, including equipment and all that, the basic rules, come to 52 pages. We're here on page 52. Now the next sections are really it's huge. One thing that a lot of bare bones universal systems don't do is they don't give you a lot to work with necessarily. This has a whole section on fantasy, and it just jumps straight into archetypes. So it tells you how to make those fantasy trope figures, and so you've got races and you've got classes, and it gives you this. And this is something that some of my favorite universal systems really kind of missed the boat on, that I ended up having to put in extra work, was just what kind of skills would someone in that genre doing a particular job have. I can imagine, but you also have to throw in the idea of what in game rules they would have. And so this comes with that. These are all your basic. This section, this fantasy section, is basically the your typical OGL D&D type characters, monsters, and spells. This thing has a ton of spells, a ton. I don't really use a lot of spells. So I'm not a high fantasy. It's not my preferred genre, but that's a lot of stuff. And some of these, and like I said, the monsters too, are D&D with the serial numbers filed off. So if you do like a D&D game and maybe want some different rules, this fantasy section is huge, and it gives a lot of Dungeons and Dragons type flavor. And basically the way the spells work, each spell or power is its own separate skill, and you buy it at level 1, 2, or 3. You cast it. You can see there are different difficulty levels for the spells, and so you have to pass the difficulty level, and that difficulty level also is how much it costs you in spirit points to cast. So it does use basically a spell point system. And I'm not going to go through all these things just because there's so many, but and you you're supposed to buy the complete guide to get this information. So yeah, a lot of good stuff here. And here's something else. It has a ton of monsters. Again, a lot of these are D&D monsters, but not just D&D. These are monsters from mythology that D&D also happen to use. But and one thing I like about the monsters and the NPCs in general is that they're simple. It's just four stats. I guess four stats, four attributes, usually short list of skills, and if you like using magical monsters, a short list of special effects that they might have. Again, some more cool art, but that's the fantasy. Okay, let's get out of the fantasy section. The next genre it does is horror. Now, horror, it basically just covers things that would be common to horror. A lot of it's Lovecraftian type stuff, because that horror could be in fantasy or it could be in sci-fi. It gives you a good list of occupations that you can use as templates, and even some monstrous type characters that you want to play. Sanity and corruption skills or procedures. They're pretty good. They essentially use your derived stats as well. And then science fiction. The science fiction, again, it has archetypes for being alien races, and I think it gives at the end of the science fiction section. Yeah, see, at the end of the science fiction section, for some reason, it gives you the characters, and I guess it's probably because these are maybe designed to be NPCs as well. It's not a big deal, just not in the same spot. But the science fiction section, it gives you a good list of a good range of sci-fi, near future, far future kind of weapons. You've got gyrojet pistols and uh, disintegrators, and that's pretty cool. When you do a massive damage on a disintegrator, they end up losing a limb. That's pretty nasty. But with the way the damage is for, say, a disintegrator, it's damage 11. You roll 1 die 6. So your basic roll, say hitting an unarmed person, is going to, an average unarmed person, they're going to die, right? Even without rolling a die 6. So you're going to get a, 12 to, uh, 12 to 19, no, not 12 to 19, 12 to 17 damage points from being hit by a disintegrator. And you can also see that there are rules for area of effect, like shooting automatic weapons and explosions and stuff like that. One thing also that I like is that they don't, for like bursts, each individual shot is its own attack. Some systems, like if you're shooting a burst, it'll just increase the damage 1 or 2. I know it's a streamlining thing, but it bothers me when they do that. My own little thing. And here you can see, like, they have armor here that's 4, 6, 8 that go higher than 1 through 3. So that I will probably do something along those lines. I don't know if maybe they kept the medieval armor at 1 through 3 to compare it to futuristic armor, to more modern materials. But I think plate needs to. I think the armor values for medieval and fantasy stuff kind of needs to match, to be bumped up. But I repeat myself. Anyway, in the sci-fi section, you have psionics. You have a psionic list of abilities, and they're basically like spells. And in fact, it uses the same skill, what it calls the arcane powers or arcane lore, arcane knowledge. I forget now. I said whatever I said at the at the front of the at the front of it. But it would be changed to something like, mental conditioning or something like that. But it would work. It would work the same. You just wanted to reskin it. And then at the end you have supers, pulp, and superpowers. This is where your characters really have high power, um, game-changing abilities. And then an index, which is unfortunately not linked in the PDF, but that's a lot of work. So I won't hold that. I won't hold that against them. This is a psionic character I made. Spent 20 points, and it's just character creation is very quick. Page 2, you can add all your background notes, other characters, and this is that field where you, if you're using a PDF, cut and paste the skills that you pick while you're making it, and then you can print it out and you'll have all those effects easy. Okay, now that is my review of the game system itself, Elemental. I'll say this is probably my new go-to game. I really like the way they do things, and I like the aesthetics, and I like a universal system. And like I said, it manages to tie a bunch of things together. No universal system is ever perfect. In fact, no dedicated system is ever perfect, especially if you're a big know-it-all like me. But I'll end with one final thing that really impressed me with Gildor Games. If you head over to, let's switch to Von Browserheimer. This is their drive-through RPG page. They have a ton of free material. Okay, just free. The discovery guide, you see right there, that's the free part. You can use it and get a good idea of how the game's played. It's free. Okay, now it doesn't have like the skill descriptions and things like that, but it has the basic system. And it was good enough to make me decide to buy the full game, the complete guide. But look at all these things. These are all free. They're adventures. Some of them are pretty big, like this Ego Hunter. There's a couple for Eclipse Phase. I basically have a lot of Eclipse Phase information, and then it's been converted for use with Elemental. I'm not a big Eclipse Phase fan, but there's a lot of good sci-fi info in there. More impressively is that there's a wide range of scenarios that they put out free. There's horror, there's zombie. This is like a horror camp zombie, or well, it's not zombie, but it's a horror camp. It's a camp in the woods. Things go bad, people start dying, kind of thing. This one's a Vietnam jungle. Your squad, long range reconnaissance patrol, happens. Your LLRP gets ambushed. And it's kind of like a 1960s version of Aliens almost, right? The Watchers, this Warriors of Valhalla, it brings in a bunch of mystical Viking type lore. And for those of you who know the Trilemma adventures, a bunch of these are in here. They're from Trilemma, the Trilemma adventures. They're 1, 2, 3 page scenarios, dungeons that have been converted over, maps, a lot of good stuff. And like I said, a lot of it's free. So anyway, that's my review of Elemental. Like I said, it's probably my new go-to for something that's outside of the narrative realm of things, which I like to play as well, because it's got, for me, just the right amount of crunch, enough character options to make to make interesting characters across multiple genres. This is Elemental by Gildor Games. Go check them out, pick it up, support them. I really like what they've done, and I like the product. So, hope this review is helpful to you, and happy gaming.